This is R2D Tech, and this week we're going to be talking about sunrise alarms. Whether they're any good, do they actually make your sleep any better or your mornings any better? So let's get straight into it. Right, so what is a sunrise alarm? Basically, it's pretty straightforward. It's just an alarm clock which tries to simulate the sun rising in the morning. And the idea behind this is that it's a more natural way to wake up, and because of that, because our bodies are accustomed to waking up when the sun rises, just like lots of animals out there, the idea is that you'll feel better when you wake up, less groggy, more awake, more refreshed. But we'll get into whether that's actually true in the video. Let's talk through a typical morning using an alarm clock like this. Let's act it out a bit. So you're in bed, you're lying down, it's pitch black in the room or thereabouts, and the alarm starts to slowly increase its brightness with a warm orange hue. And it's very dim at first, your body doesn't even notice it, you're still asleep at this point, but then it slowly starts to increase that warm hue and the brightness as well, until eventually you start to notice a bit, you start moving around in bed just a little bit, and eventually you wake up to the sight of the sunrise, or at least the artificial sunrise in your room. Now yes, that sounds pretty magical, but the reality is that if you're a really heavy sleeper, or you're waking up really early that morning for some reason, you might just be too tired and completely miss this entire sunrise process. But you'll be happy to know that at the end of it, most of these types of alarms do actually have the option to set an alarm sound at the end of the sunrise process, just in case you don't wake up in time. So, for example, with mine, I've set a really nice bird chirping noise, which is really natural and a nice sound to wake up to, even if you don't wake up with the sunrise. So either way, it's pretty much a win-win, right? Because you either wake up to the sun rising, or you wake up to something nice like birds chirping or something like that. So there's not much I can fault the alarm with in that regard. The big question, I guess, is how much better do you actually feel waking up in this way? And also, does it work instantly? How many times do you have to try this before you actually start waking up to the sun rising rather than the alarm at the end? And you might be surprised to know, maybe if you've watched lots of other videos out there which make it seem like an instant amazing thing that happens, that at first your body does need to get used to it, especially if you're in a room that doesn't have really good blinds and your room is already fairly bright in the morning. The difference between the light in your room and the light coming from an alarm clock like this isn't big enough at first before you've sensitized yourself a bit to actually wake up to the sun rising. So in my case, for example, it took me like a good week or two, or maybe even a bit more than that, before I actually started noticing the light coming on in the morning and waking up to that, rather than just the birds chirping or the alarm clock at the end. So no, in my experience, unfortunately, it's not an instant thing. You're not going to buy this alarm clock and instantly start waking up to the sun rising in a really serene sort of way, unless, of course, you have something like blackout blinds in your room. In that case, I imagine that the contrast between complete darkness and this light coming on will be quite large compared to, say, a room like mine where the light does seep in a bit through the blinds, and I imagine that it would work really well in a situation like that. So if that is you and you have got blackout blinds and stuff, you're probably going to be making the most out of a product like this. But for most of us out there, it will take a bit of getting used to. The good news, however, is that after using it for quite some time, you'll notice that your body becomes a lot more sensitive to the light that comes out, and you might even start waking up when it's really dim, just like the beginning of the sunrise, and slowly just be able to lie in bed as the sun rises, which is quite a nice way to wake up. Whether or not you're going to see a huge improvement in your morning mood waking up with an alarm clock like this is a different question. I personally haven't seen a huge benefit to using this over just a normal alarm clock. In fact, with this alarm, you do have to actually set the time a bit earlier, or you set your standard alarm clock time, but it will start increasing the brightness, say 20-30 minutes before you wake up, so that it's at maximum brightness and the alarm sounds at the time that you've set the alarm, which means that you might actually be waking up earlier than you intended. That, of course, could be a good thing if you want to get a head start in the morning, or it could mean that you're losing out on a few more minutes of sleep, which could make a difference to your mood in a negative way. In my opinion, it's definitely not going to negatively impact your sleep. It's quite a nice way to wake up, and you can choose how long the window is between low brightness and high brightness to alarm as well. But I don't think it's going to be a huge game changer in terms of feeling a lot more refreshed in the morning. Certainly you might feel slightly nicer, especially not having to hear a really loud banging, buzzing sound or anything like that from your iPhone alarm. So I've already mentioned these, but if I were to highlight the two negatives, in my opinion, of a sunrise alarm clock, the first would definitely be that if you don't have blinds in your room, or you don't have very good blinds or curtains, then the difference between the light coming in from the outside and the actual alarm clock itself, especially when it's still at the dim phase of the sunrise, won't be enough to wake you up until you've really sensitized to it over maybe a month or two. But after that, it should be fine. Unless, of course, you're waking up really early when it's still pitch black outside, then it should definitely be fine, or if you have blackout blinds as well. The other negative, of course, is that you might wake up earlier than you intended when you become more sensitive to the light as well, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing, but if you really value those extra few minutes of sleep, you might want to set the alarm a tiny bit ahead of when you want to wake up if you've become really sensitive to it, and then hopefully you'll wake up in time. Moving on, in terms of actually getting one of these sunrise alarm clocks, the price can range from not very much to extremely expensive if you get something like a Philips Hue one or something like that. I personally cheaped out and went for the first one, or one of the first ones I saw on Amazon, and I think it was about £25. It was from a company called Foyond, I believe, but I'll put that on the screen now if you want to check that out. It's worked pretty well for me. It does its job, you know, it has the sunrise. It can even do sunset as well if you like to read at night and you want the light to start fairly bright and slowly dim, and then you can fall asleep with that, which might be quite nice as well. I personally haven't really used this feature, and there's lots of other features on there which I haven't used, like the radio, and you can even do RGB lights, which can make your room look quite nice as well. But that's, you know, the main purpose of the alarm is just that nice sunrise alarm clock, and I will say that the one I have has worked pretty well for that. Putting everything aside though, I guess the real question is whether it's worth trying this out for you personally. And I'd say it's a very interesting way to wake up. You know, it's different from a normal alarm clock, and arguably a much nicer experience, you know, less of a heart attack experience and more of a gradual, nice way to wake up. So if anything, it will probably improve your morning mood just a little bit. Of course, there are other alternatives that you might want to try out as well before you try and buy something like this, which will cost you at least £25 or so. For example, there are apps out there like Sleep Cycle, which can track your sleep and sound the alarm when you're in light sleep, and you might feel better waking up that way as well. So I definitely recommend trying something like that out, and I might make a video on that in the future. It works really well, especially if you have a smartwatch like an Apple Watch, because it can really track your sleep cycles and wake you up at the right time. But I will be testing that out over the next few weeks, and I'll probably do a video. Whether I'd recommend a sunrise alarm clock though, I'd say I would recommend it if you're willing to spend that amount of money for your alarm clock. It is a nice experience, it's a nice way to wake up overall. Even if it's not going to make a huge difference to your mood, I think overall though it is better than just a really loud, blaring alarm clock in the morning. Well, those are my thoughts on the sunrise alarm clock. Personally, I think that if you can make just a tiny bit of a difference to your morning mood and just how happy you are when you wake up on a day-to-day basis, then it's definitely worth it in the long term. Whether this is going to work for you is totally subjective, but I personally think that it will probably make just that little bit of a difference every morning, so I think it's something worth trying overall. That's it for this week though. I'd be really interested to hear about what you guys think as well in the comments below. If you like the video, then definitely leave a thumbs up, and if you want to see more content like this in the future, then smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bar below.